it's much more than a tick box exercise to really kind of meet, whether it's Australia's mandatory climate reporting or whether it's India's BRSR, to really kind of meet what they're asking. It's not just about kind of setting a target and forgetting about it. You've got to be able to demonstrate, how you are integrating, whether it be climate, whether it be a broader sustainability issue, across your entire business.
Hello, welcome to Sustainability Voices, the podcast dedicated to exploring the impactful stories behind the voices driving sustainable change. I'm Patrick Obeid, founder of a climate tech startup and your host for this series. In today's episode, we will explore sustainability regulations in APAC with Mike Rhydderch from Burson. Stay tuned as we uncover various facets of sustainability, voice by voice. Welcome to Sustainability Voices. Today, we're very lucky to have Mike Rhydderch from Burson with us to discuss mandatory climate reporting in APAC and the role of communication agencies in this picture.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. It's a real honour. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this. So listen, my my role is I with Burson, I lead their sustainability and social impact offering for the APAC region. So it's a global service offering, and I lead it out of APAC. It's been a bit of a journey in my sustainability career. It's been through, I guess, a few different iterations. I guess what led me into sustainability was my passion and desire to try to make the world a better place, as, I don't know, maybe naive as that might sound, but still I feel very much like that. I've been on a bit of a journey. I've started off with my environmental science degree, so quite kind of ecosystems based, and then moved into science communication, which was all about how do we communicate complex scientific topics to the general audience and get them engaged. And then sort of from there went into a range of different roles around kind of environmental education and project management, then moved over to the kind of corporate sustainability space around kind of building portfolios, and then worked in that quite technical role of carbon accounting and setting science-based targets. And then I've had the opportunity to become a B consultant, which is a global B Corp is a global certification across environmental, social, and governance. So I've had a fantastic opportunity to then grow my skills in that social sustainability and that kind of understanding what good governance is. That's led me to where I am now. Helping companies across that kind of holistic view of sustainability, whether it be environmental issues, whether it be social issues, or kind of helping them build that governance framework that they need to really kind of tackle their sustainability issues. So it's been a good journey. It's been a very kind of definitely hasn't been a linear journey. It's been a lot of side steps, but I've enjoyed the ride.
That's awesome, Mike. I love hearing you kind of got into this world. I think I always say one of the biggest gaps in this sustainability world is the lack of accurate PR and accurate communication, whether it's corporations communicating externally, whether it's leaders communicating internally, even across organizations. Sometimes I see a lot of inconsistencies, and I think it's the importance of PR is extremely high, and I believe that your role is going to be really critical in helping us drive this transformational journey over the next few years. Perhaps I would love to double click on a broader topic, which is the mandatory climate reporting in APAC. What's on the horizon for companies in Australia, China, New Zealand, India, and how are they preparing for these regulations today?
It's a really fast-moving and kind of fascinating space, particularly in the APAC region. I think that often the world does look to EU in terms of how it's leading and what it's developing, and for the world to kind of follow. But when we look at mandatory climate reporting, it was actually New Zealand that was the first country to ever kind of mandate climate reporting, and the rest of the APAC region is really accelerating in this space. Australia have just recently legislated mandatory climate reporting to kick off, just next year, 2025, and when we look at the other big players in the APAC region, China have really ramped up their ESG requirements. They've got the what's called the CSR guideline, which is, when you look at that, it's much more than just climate. It is across the environmental, social, and governance areas. It's got 21 topics. If you look at the BRSR in India, again, much more than climate. A broader focus on environmental impacts around resource efficiency, a broader focus on social sustainability issues. So I think we're seeing this kind of acceleration of ESG regulations coming in, and what we're kind of at this point now where, whilst some companies might be going down this pathway and some companies might have been kind of delving into this space from a voluntary perspective, what we're seeing now is that the net is being cast much further than just the kind of the top tier companies, and a lot of kind of second tier and third tier companies are going to have to start thinking about how they can address these kind of increasing ESG regulations, and essentially understanding how far they are right now from actually meeting those requirements. And I think I don't know, I have this conversation a lot around, is compliance becoming too onerous for companies, and is that actually inhibiting companies from rolling out, whether it be environmental initiatives or social initiatives, because they're spending so much time in that kind of reporting space. But I think when you actually look at what these regulatory frameworks are asking companies to do, it's much more than a tick box exercise to really kind of meet, whether it's Australia's mandatory climate reporting or whether it's India's BRSR, to really kind of meet what they're asking. It's not just about kind of setting a target and forgetting about it. You've got to be able to demonstrate how you are integrating, whether it be climate, whether it be a broader sustainability issue, across your entire business. And that means having transition plans. That means identifying the financial impact of this risk to your business, as well as the impact externally to the broader societal people and planet. And you've got to be able to kind of integrate that into your risk management frameworks, and build strategies both near and long term, to really kind of demonstrate how you are kind of moving towards that target. So I think it's I think a nice, I don't know, the way I kind of think about it is that the kind of regulated world is finally catching up to what the market has been asking, and what investors have been asking of their companies, and what customers have been asking of who they buy their products from, or who they engage the services with. So the regulated market is kind of just catching up to what the broader ecosystem has been asking.
Mike, I love that last analogy that you brought up. I think it's funny that you said that, because I think in every geography around the world, the dynamics are different. I think in APAC, based on what you said, and I totally agree with that, is that the regulatory market is now catching up with investor demand. I think the feeling in Europe is a bit different, whereby the regulations are stringent with very, like, tight enforcement roadmaps and timelines, and it seems like the regulatory environment is actually driving the rest. And I think in the US, they're very, very divergent, right? Because of the US being a bit more deregulated, and investors in the US, often having LPs in Europe, which is a more regulated market. Actually, the feeling in the US is the exact opposite, whereby companies in the US are feeling, oh, the regulations are actually going to become not as important going into 2025. But at the same time, investor requests, customer requests, bank requests are rising like more than ever. So I love that perspective. I think it's very interesting to see the geographical differences. Also, in general, based on what I've seen in the past, a lot of the regulatory pressures often starts in Europe, and then very quickly countries in APAC like Australia, China, and also countries in LATAM like Brazil and many other countries around the world, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, often catch up to those before the United States then follows. And I think we're seeing the same dynamic play out here. So really love that perspective. I have actually one more question. Do based on the conversations that you're having with companies on a day to day, how many of them are feeling this is just a pure burden versus seeing this as an opportunity for change and as an opportunity to be able to actually expand their EBITDA and become more profitable by becoming more environmentally conscious, by becoming more ESG positive? Yeah, I would love to hear a bit more about the sentiment of these companies today in APAC.
Yeah, is a really good question, and it's something that again, kind of, I spend probably a lot of my time day to day, talking to different clients and talking to different stakeholders around how do we shift exactly what you said. How do we shift that mindset from one of kind of compliance that feels like an additional task that they have to do on their already, busy schedule, to one of actually this is going to help us drive value creation as a business. And, it's something that if we integrate it properly, it's not an additional thing. It actually becomes, part of BAU. Because it really, when we think about environmental and social risks to a business, what I often say to companies, and it's not necessarily a quote I made up myself, although I would like to claim it, but it was from a man called Nigel Topping, UNFCCC, and I heard it on a workshop, and he said that sustainability is not a green or a moral conversation anymore. It's one of a competitiveness conversation, and I think that's where we have to, I think companies have to kind of get to that point to say, all right, well, it's not a nice thing to do really anymore. It's actually about being able to continue to function and to continue to be kind of profitable and continue to address those risks, whether it be a transitional risk like, increasing regulations like we're seeing obviously, play out in Europe, or whether it be another transitional risk and market share and not being left behind, or whether it be, direct physical risks associated with assets, in different locations, around the world where the company may operate, and those being stranded or those being, continually impacted. Even though we have those conversations, though, there definitely is still that element of, okay, this is coming in, just tell me what it is, tell me what I have to do, help me understand what my priorities are. And, we obviously do a lot of that with our clients, and really kind of helping them understand that kind of gap analysis of, okay, well, what are they currently doing? What are the regulations asking them to do? And where do they need to start leaning in a little bit more heavily? But I think, again, being or having a sustainability offering within a PR company, the other element that we really talk about is the opportunity that undertaking this work, the content that it creates for companies to actually, generate that positive brand value. You can't talk about good things unless you're doing good things, essentially. So, the more that you kind of go down this road, the more content that you create that allows you to then build that brand value, and something that is, that we consider very risky is that companies are kind of going forward with a CSR or a CSR campaign without actually having that kind of content and framework behind them that allows them to kind of go out and facilitate that CSR campaign. So we often kind of have these sorts of conversations, and I think once companies kind of start to see the positive information that they're receiving and the clarity, and I think a lot of the time as well, it's almost about kind of growing, expanding the comfort zone, particularly of leaders within a business. A lot of the time, if it's something that's not well understood, something that they don't know how to address, and they don't necessarily have the right kind of language and in terms of understanding the terminology, whether it be climate, whether it be nature, whether it be human capital issues, it's often difficult for them to really kind of come to grips with it. But that kind of educational piece cannot be underestimated, because once people understand what the regulations are and what they have to do, and it becomes a lot less fearful, right? And then you become a lot more open to addressing it, because you kind of know what you need to do.
Absolutely. No, I love that perspective, Mike, and I love how you framed it as well. And it's very comforting and refreshing to hear that this is how the environment and the sentiment is across APAC. With the urgency of some of these regulations and reporting requirements and these new rules, what are some core challenges that these companies are facing as they get started on this journey?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that one of the biggest core challenges, obviously, is that kind of that education right within leadership. So we often talk about the word governance, and governance is thrown around a lot, but it's really important to ensure that the company has that kind of understanding and that drive within the leadership team to actually want to make progress towards addressing environmental and social impacts, and often that's where the biggest roadblock can be for a company. We might work within a company where we're doing some really good work, and we've got the roadmap and we're building out that kind of direction, and then there's a bit of a roadblock with the leadership, and it's often it is because of that kind of lack of understanding of the topic, and again how to kind of integrate that into their risk management framework, etc. So I think that one of the biggest roadblocks is that kind of building that internal knowledge. I think another roadblock is obviously, and it's talked about again and again and again, but is data. And again, like unfortunately, we're still at that point of being able to source good data across, a company's operations as well as their value chain. And whether it be on greenhouse gas emissions, whether it be on social sustainability issues around modern slavery, etc., things like that, how do we source that really good information that then allows us to set realistic targets and build realistic roadmaps? And we're definitely getting better at that, and there's a lot of work that's been done on building out those kind of global databases that companies can tap into. But again, I think when we think of the size of the company as well, that itself can be an inhibitor, because obviously if we're a large company and we've got a lot of money and we've got internal resources, we can kind of spend the time to put pressure on our suppliers to give us information, or we've got the resources to go out and get good data or engage consultants to do specific pieces of work. But when we think of SMEs, a lot of those companies don't have that capacity or those resources to go and source that information, to then set good targets, to then build good roadmaps. So there needs to still be a lot of work done to really kind of provide that kind of solid data, those solid databases that allows those smaller companies to kind of tap into and really streamline the way that they can collect information and then get on with making progress on their journey. So I think that the data is still a big kind of inhibitor for a lot of companies. And then also, I think, when we think of, like, we are talking about, the rise of ESG regulations, which is great, but we are still faced with, in a lot of countries, a kind of lack of policy that can really provide those clear indicators for businesses to function. And, often we're kind of impacted by short-term policies that are not sort of built for long-term vision. And I think the market is still not at that point of competitive sustainability that can really allow that kind of incentivizing businesses to integrate those sustainability choices, whether it be the service they provide or the product that they manufacture. A good example is, if I'm manufacturing a product and, I obviously want to increase the circularity in that product and improve the efficiency of it. So I use a high proportion of recycled content. I don't use virgin materials. I, have a really efficient manufacturing process and reduce, energy waste and water consumption. And I use kind of sustainable distribution supply chains, and then I allow my products to be returned and repaired, or I might have a kind of a product as a service, offering. If I do all those things, then potentially my product is going to be more expensive than, another similar product on the market that doesn't do any of those things, and then can sell the product into the market cheaper, but we're still not reflecting the impact that other product has, on using virgin materials, on, not having any recycled content. So I think that the market still has a way to go to create that competitive sustainability so that we can really incentivize companies to integrate those circularity principles. And I think, that reflects still that kind of lack of policies that that can really drive that.
Mike, I loved your perspective on the maturity of the regulatory market. Actually, one question you inspired me to ask is, what similarities do you see between the APAC regulatory environment and the European regulatory environment like CSRD?
Yeah, so I think that like there's been a lot of work that's been done across the last couple of years, beyond the regulations in really kind of standardizing what good sustainability disclosure needs to look like. And when we think of, we think back to 2015 and the TCFD, Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures, they really kind of came out and set, I guess, a good standard on what does good climate disclosure need to look like. So we've got the four pillars of governance and strategy and risk management and metrics and targets. And since that time, we now have the ISSB, who are now kind of in control of standardizing sustainability disclosures. And so I guess what that's done is helped regulatory markets understand kind of what good looks like. Now, the CSRD obviously takes elements absolutely of kind of the ISSB, and so does pretty much every other market. So when we think of the ESG regulations across APAC, the majority of them are taking that framework of those four pillars of governance, of risk management, of strategy, of metrics and targets. Some have essentially just kind of almost copy and pasted what those voluntary frameworks are into their regulatory frameworks, and kind of tweaked it a little bit. And some have expanded on it. Like the CSRD, the ISSB has a very kind of financial materiality focus, whereas the CSRD takes more of that kind of double materiality lens, whereby it's not just about the financial materiality, the financially material impacts to the business. It's also about the material impacts to people and planet outside of the organization. So not every other market takes on that double materiality perspective, absolutely. But I think, the similarities are that, they're both, well, the CSRD and other ESG regulations across APAC obviously both focus on transparency. They're both aligning with those kind of international standards like ISSB, taking guidance from SASB, both really collectively really focused on stakeholder engagement and that integration. I think what's really important is that kind of integration, whether it be climate or whether it be broader sustainability issues. How do you integrate that into your business? And again, building those kind of strategies to address that and really kind of understanding what, from a financial perspective, what the impacts are and what sort of financial allocation you have to start putting to those sustainability risks to essentially turn those into opportunities. So yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities across both, and that is, to some degree, it's on purpose, right? Because there's a really strong understanding in the market out there that companies are already overwhelmed, and that's why there has been a really strong push for standardization of disclosures. So again, kind of stepping out of the regulatory framework, if we look at what has happened across the last couple of years, the ISSB has essentially consumed TCFD, it's taken in SASB, it's taken in kind of Integrated Reporting Council, it's taken in all of these different bodies and brought them in under one umbrella, and it's communicating really strongly with the GRI. So there's a lot of work being done to really kind of streamline what good sustainability disclosure looks like, and the regulatory market looks at that and says, okay, right, rather than create a whole new framework for companies, they're taking a lot of that information into their regulatory requirements.
Mike, I really appreciate that perspective. I'm sure our listeners learned a ton from the last few sections and of this episode. Maybe shifting gears a bit towards the role of PR agencies and communication agencies in the new evolving complex world of ESG. PR agencies like Burson are taking a bigger role in the sustainability space. I see that a lot in the United States, for example, specifically in APAC and specifically for Burson. How do you help companies navigate these complex ESG demands?
So I think a good way to think of it is that Sir David Attenborough said that climate change is not a science problem anymore, it's a communications problem. And essentially what he's saying here is that we know the science of the impacts of climate change or other sustainability issues, yet we are still not moving fast enough. So there is obviously this gap between data and that kind of technical element of sustainability, the measurement piece and the quantification piece, and how do we actually get companies to begin that transition or to drive momentum. So it's not good enough to just give them technical information and expect them to go off and do something about it. And I think that's where the role of kind of PR agencies and sustainability communications expertise really comes into play. We need to be able to drive momentum with businesses. So we need to help businesses be able to, from the technical information, to drive those stories, to build those messages that can resonate with staff, with leadership, with externally to consumers, to investors, to other stakeholders. We need to ensure that their sustainability messages are authentic and avoid the pitfalls of greenwashing. So we, in today's world, it's such an interesting time right now because we have this kind of rise of greenwashing claims and focus on it. And absolutely that should occur. But the last thing we want is to move into this kind of world of green hushing where companies are just not talking about what they're doing from a sustainability perspective, or they're just burying it in really big, deep reports, that the average person can't engage with, or they're winding back targets for fear of being penalized. And so I think, again, that's where that kind of PR communications expertise becomes so valuable, that we need to help them kind of almost expand their level of comfort to say, yes, it's okay. You should have a strong target. It's okay if you're not going to hit it for reasons X, Y, and Z. But what you need to do is be transparent about what you've done, what you're doing, the decisions you've made based on the data that you had at the time. And again, I think it's that understanding that transparency is key to avoiding that risk. And obviously, regions, and I could go on, but it's becoming more complex, and I think we need those kind of communications expertise to really help companies feel comfortable and understand what those steps need to be.
Absolutely, Mike. And I love what you said. I think the key is to basically, I love what you said in terms of setting ambitious targets and working really hard to achieve them, but also, celebrate the success along the way. And it's okay if you fall a bit short as long as there's a clear explanation. I think where the challenges start rising is when companies are setting targets and they're not really, they're just talking the talk, but not like walking the walk. And I think, there's a very fine line between what you said and between what I'm saying. And I think the key is to be able to find that sweet balance between setting ambitious yet achievable targets and then really committing to working hard and setting the right processes to enable those over time. One concern that comes up is actually greenwashing. And I believe communication and PR agencies, should play a big role in fighting greenwashing. A lot of companies are overstating their sustainability efforts. How can communication agencies stay true to the facts and avoid enabling that inflation of positive image for their clients?
So we are at a really pivotal point right now, I guess in history when it comes to greenwashing. There's a huge focus on it globally right now, whether it be from regulatory stakeholders, whether it be from investors, whether it be from informed consumers. And obviously the number of litigation cases are growing. But I think that in terms of when it comes to greenwashing, it's not an overly complicated process. It's essentially understanding what sort of content do you have behind any sort of claim that you're making, and what sort of data do you have. And again, it goes back to that. It's okay to make a decision based off the data that you have. And I think everyone in the market is aware. Again, you look at a regulation, you look at a voluntary framework, all of these pieces say, they have that, I guess, that allowance for that, I guess that uncertainty. So you're making decisions based on the information that you have. And as new data comes in, or new methods of collecting information, or better ways of collecting information comes in, it's expected that that information may change, and that'll change the way that you do things. And that's totally fine. And I think it's about helping companies understand that it's okay to make a decision based on the information that you have at the time, and that may change. But what's really important is just transparency, transparency, transparency. Just really acknowledging where you got the information from, how it was assessed, the process that you'll take if new information comes through. And it's not an overly complicated process. It's just making sure that you have that diligence.
Absolutely, Mike. I really love that perspective. Yeah, it's a I think it's extremely inspiring to see all the great things you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and supporting these companies on this very challenging yet rewarding journey. Perhaps we spoke a lot about what's happening now and kind of your role in the last year or two supporting these companies. Perhaps looking ahead a bit, like how do you see the role of PR and communication agencies evolving as climate reporting becomes mandatory, and what should companies expect from their communication partners?
I think we're at a point now where, it's an exciting point where we're seeing sustainability related issues being integrated into the everyday operations of businesses. So, it's slowly but surely becoming kind of a part of BAU conversations across all functions of a business. And the fact that Burson has a global sustainability and social impact offering is a sign of, I guess, how much it is starting to integrate in the world of PR. More and more our employees are being asked by their clients all forms of different sustainability related questions because it's flowing into the everyday business. And so, I think that what we're likely to see is the kind of the rise of ESG comms, communications offerings in the market from different agencies as, everyone starts to kind of build that understanding. But I think what's really important, and something that we focused on at Burson, is that if a PR agency or communications partner is going to advise on ESG or sustainability, it's so important to have that technical knowledge to support that advisory offering. And again, that's the whole reason I exist within Burson. I'm not necessarily, you could probably tell from some of the things I said, I'm not necessarily a PR comms person. I don't come from the world of agency. I come from that sustainability consulting space. But the reason that I'm in this role is because we can't provide that kind of PR and communications if we don't understand the technicality. So you've really got to understand the devil in the detail when it comes to sustainability, or ESG. It is becoming more data driven, more technical. So you've got to understand that technical element of it to be able to essentially drive that really powerful kind of storytelling and communication. So I think, there's a real sweet spot in being able to bring both of those worlds of technical and that kind of PR, kind of storytelling, communications expertise together to deliver a really powerful solution for clients.
Mike, I learned a ton from you today, and especially, most of our customers and operations are in Europe and North America. Obviously, a lot of the suppliers of our customers, and our customers have a lot of facilities in APAC, but we don't really work directly in APAC yet. So this has been like an incredibly enlightening conversation. I'm sure our listeners benefited a lot from it as well. Perhaps before we wrap up, any final thoughts for companies just starting their journey with mandatory climate reporting in APAC?
Yeah, I think because we obviously have a lot of conversations with clients, no matter what their size, and I think what's really important, and again, not just necessarily for climate, but just that kind of broader holistic sustainability, is that it's really important, whether you're mandated or not, to get started on that journey today. And the reason I say that is obviously for that broader kind of, we think beyond the business, that kind of broader good of, to benefit both people and planet. But from a business perspective, you as a company, you're likely to have customers that will be regulated. And each ESG regulatory framework will not only ask companies to measure the impact of their direct operations, but it will include their value chain as well. So what that means is those mandated companies will have to go and ask their suppliers for information so that they can meet their regulatory requirements. So what that means is that all of those kind of mandated questions are likely to come down the line to those smaller companies anyway. from their tier one customers. So even just from a business risk and being able to win future tenders, being able to maintain client relationship, it's such an important piece to be able to demonstrate that you're doing work in, as well as being able to meet your kind of smaller customer inquiries and demands. I think it's also important to, not be overwhelmed. If you wait until you absolutely have to do it, a lot of these requirements under different ESG regulatory frameworks, again, whether it's India's BRSR, whether it's Australia's mandatory climate reporting, whether it's China's CSR guidelines, it will take some time to prepare. It's not something that a company is going to be able to turn around and do in a few weeks' time. So again, we always encourage companies to really undertake that maturity assessment, to know what they're being asked of and what they're currently doing and what their industry is doing, kind of knowing where you sit and how much work you have to do and really building that roadmap. So it will take some time to upskill the leadership team. Whether it be climate, whether it be another sustainability related issue, a lot of the time that is foreign to them in terms of understanding the technicalities and the concepts of that. If we think about climate, understanding scenario analysis, building climate transition plans or measuring your greenhouse gas emissions, those sorts of things don't necessarily come easy to everyone. And so kind of building that kind of comfort and understanding of what those things are and what's required, that takes time. So there's no harm in building that education, building that understanding now and doing some of that kind of groundwork, the gap analysis, the maturity assessment, the education, some of that stuff that doesn't necessarily feel overwhelming. It's more just kind of getting you prepared and building that a kind of framework that will then allow you to jump into some of that more technical work. I think that's the important kind of takeaways that can build that framework, and so you won't feel overwhelmed when you get into some of those more technical pieces.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing session. I really appreciate your time, and our listeners, I'm sure, learned a ton from this. So really grateful for your time, Mike, and loved your perspective, and it was very enlightening. It really broadened my perspective a bit more about how to think about PR and communication in regards to driving change in this ever-evolving world of sustainability. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Patrick. Cheers.
Great. This is the Sustainability Voices podcast. You can find all episodes of the show at esgflow.com, Spotify, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd like for you to subscribe to stay connected. I look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of Sustainability Voices. My name is Patrick Obeid. You can find me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for listening.